All right, so welcome everyone on Zoom and on Facebook. I hope we're hoping that we can do live on Facebook right now, but we're still checking on that. So um, we'll keep you updated about that too as well. My name is Cindy Vu. I use she, her pronouns, and I work at R Streets, Minneapolis. I'll be your MC for today. So I do want to let folks know that we are recording live right now. This recording will be shared later on our social media and website. So just in case you can't stay on the call the full time, and you have to do other things at home or other places, that you can watch this later too as well. So as we wait for people to get on Zoom and Facebook, let us know where you're joining us from. So we have some questions on there on the screen, just telling us in chat box which neighborhood or city you're tuning in from, just to get a little bit of engagement and hear from folks. So we having folks from Apple Valley, Whittier, Kingfield, Minneapolis, Phillips, Northside, Northeast, and Loring. So as folks are chatting in the box and we're waiting for folks to join us or more people to join us, I just want to let the attendees know what features that you have on your end. So I will be going through, for today, we will have the chat open and also the Q&A for the duration of the webinar. Those features are on the bottom of your screen. If you need to hover over them, you can hover them to see them. Throughout this webinar, if you have questions, please use the Q&A box. There will be dedicated time for the panel to answer questions or the panel discussion later tonight. And we will try to answer as many questions as we can during this webinar. But know that we won't get to all of the questions in the chat box, but we will make sure at a later time that we do get back to some of those questions, especially those on Facebook. I just want to let you know you can also make those questions anonymous and or you can just have your name on there too as well. So there's some privacy on that. Okay. So today we'll have a series of polls. Just to let you know, we'll have a series of great speakers to line up. These polls are meant to stir some engagement, but we will not be using as a measure for the community, as not everyone will be on this call that lives, work, and play in those corridors. It will give folks on the call a sense of how people can feel about moving along Hennepin County streets. So we're going to start with our first poll, be an icebreaker question, just for the audience to see how the polls work on Zoom. If you haven't tried it before, it is multiple choice. You can choose more than one option. I'm going to have Nick Ray throw on the icebreaker poll right now. So on the icebreaker poll, we have, how do you primarily get around Minneapolis or where you live, where you're calling from? So first one is walking, biking. Third one's wheelchair or other mobility device. Fourth one is bus or train. Fifth one is electric scooter or other micromobility device, or driving. So we're just going to wait a minute or two on that. All right, so we're going to close that poll, and then we're going to drop the answers or the results from that poll. All right, so it seems as though 62%, the most, Bike, who's on the call right now. We have about 72 people joining us today on this specific call. and then 51% of those walking. So lots of folks walking and biking. So now you know how the poll works. We're going to be throwing in some engagement like that throughout the event. All right, so without further ado, I'll have Ash Narayanan will be kicking us off. He's the Executive Director of Our Streets Minneapolis. Ash, can you turn on your camera now?
Hello and welcome to everybody. It's really good to have all of you here. We had over 240 registrations for this, and we have about 100 people online right now. So thank you all again for taking the time today. My name is Ash Narayanan, and I am the Executive Director at Our Streets Minneapolis. So at today's event, we have a really great lineup of speakers. Our main goal is for us to be able to hear from all of these people, folks who are organizers, artists, connectors, and really people who are beloved community members. And we've designed this event so we can listen to a variety of perspectives from people who are deeply involved in our community and understand how their work affects our lives and as well as our streets. So before we get started, I would like to ask all the panelists and our core partners to turn on your cameras so all of the attendees can see you all. First, I'd like to introduce Kenya McPeters. She is our ASL interpreter. Thank you so much, Kenya, for being here. I know it's not easy to do this over Zoom, so we're really grateful that you're doing this for us. Thank you. I also want to introduce a couple of our other core partners who've been with us from the start of this campaign. First, I'd like to say, Will, can you say hello? Will Delaney from Hope Community. Thanks for being here, Will. And Christina Perfetti from St. Anthony East Neighborhood Association. Hi, Christina. And Felicia Perry from the West Broadway Business and Area Coalition, WBC. Thanks, all of you, for being here. Felicia, of course, is going to be one of our speakers today, so we'll get to hear more from what she said. So I just want to extend my heartfelt thanks to Will, Christina, Felicia, for all the work that you've done to get us to this point. I also want to mention that Lake Street Council was one of our core partners in this work as well. Unfortunately, in the events following George Floyd's murder, they've had to take a step back to help with rebuilding on Lake Street. Their own offices were burned down, and we're really grateful for the work that they're doing to get Lake Street back on track. But I do want to mention that Matt Kazinka there has been instrumental in this campaign as well. Then I'd really like to thank my team at Our Streets Minneapolis. First, Nick Ray Olson, who is behind the scenes helping facilitate this webinar. Thank you, Nick Ray. Emily Wade, who's our Communications and Development Director, has been instrumental in getting the word out for this webinar. Thank you, Emily. And Carly Cole, also behind the scenes monitoring our questions and has put together the websites for County Streets for People. So with that, I'll ask all of you to turn off your cameras now. And I also want to just thank Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Minnesota Center for Prevention, who helped us get this webinar and this whole campaign. They've helped us make it happen. So thank you as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Cindy, who will give us a little more information on logistics of the webinar, as well as our Safer Spaces policy.
All right, thanks, Ash. So here at Our Streets Minneapolis, there were a core team of staff that developed our Safer Spaces definition back in 2016. I'm just going to read that out to you all. Our Safer Spaces definition, our Safer Spaces are intentional anti-oppression spaces created with the goal of supporting and welcoming all identities, meaning all genders, races, religions, abilities, orientations, etc. We make safer spaces by being brave enough to enter these spaces and being vulnerable to making mistakes and learning, and by calling out and responding to oppressive behavior. So tonight, we're continuing to seek and to learn and to grow with our communities so that we don't continue to displace and silence them. The work that we are doing right now is through the efforts of many people before us and those still continuing to fight for spaces that includes and center the voices of Black people, Indigenous people, people of color, people with disabilities, immigrants, trans, and gender nonconforming people. If you're not a part of these groups, we welcome you to listen and to learn from the wisdom of our speakers and to those most oppressed and legally vulnerable. That means uplifting, supporting, and nurturing those who have been left out of the conversation. Most of the people on this call, I can boldly say, have faced trauma on the streets, trauma that still lives in our bodies today. I welcome people to create space for you during this call that supports your needs as you listen in. We thank you all for joining us today, no matter how you show up. So right now, I'm inviting you all just to take a pause and to notice your breath at this moment. Notice the inhale through the nose and the exhaling through the nose. Notice the pause between the inhale and the exhale. Throughout this webinar, check in with yourself and your body and honor what it says. There might be feelings that surface. If comfortable, notice those feelings. You can choose to leave them at the door or take it into this webinar to fuel the conversation where we seek to learn from our communities that have continued to be displaced and silenced. So I ask you all to join us with an open mind to learn, grow, and dream with us in how we can create a space and create spaces that centers people's bodies, their identities, and experiences. With our limited ability to hold public meetings as intended, we are shifting and adapting to the new changes and trying our very best to create an inclusive space online. And we are always open to trying to improve and welcome feedback. So we're going to start this. Our next transition will be our putting up our Franklin Avenue poll. I'm going to have Nick Ray pull that up. We're just going to get a little bit of engagement. Wanting to hear from folks on the call on what is your biggest challenge while navigating Franklin Avenue. First one says crossing the streets. Second one is fast moving cars. Third one is lack of good sidewalks. Fourth is bike is not easy or comfortable. Fifth one is driving feels stressful. Sixth is using a mobility device like a wheelchair. Seventh is taking the bus. Eighth is riding an electric scooter that is not easy or comfortable. And I don't face any challenges. And the last one, other, you can put it in the chat if you like. These are multiple choice. You can choose more than one. And I'll just give you a minute or two for the folks who are joining us, the 90 attendees right now, just get a chance to, or a moment to answer and take the poll. For those who are joining us right now, welcome to our Counting Streets for People webinar kickoff. We're looking forward to engaging with you all later in the panel discussion and answering some of the questions that may come up. If you do have questions, please put it in the Q&A box that is available below at the menu bar of your screen. All right, so I'm gonna have Nick Ray close that poll and then poll it up. All right, so it seems the biggest challenge while navigating Franklin Avenue, the folks who are on this call right now, is biking is not easy or comfortable. It's 58% in fast moving cars on Franklin, as well as crossing the street. All right. So our speaker later on may speak on this a little bit more about Franklin Avenue. So I'm just going to close this poll right now. And I'm going to introduce our very first speaker. So our very first speaker of today is Robert Lilligren. I will have Robert introduce himself. Robert, you may turn your camera on.
Bonjour, Nindinaway Maganaduk, Bawa Babi Ginakag and Dinjaba, Ojawishko Neneji Nindodam, Ogemamish Kwadezi and Dijnakaz. I'm Robert Lilligren. I use he, him pronouns. I am a citizen of the White Earth Ojibwe Nation. I'm a third generation Minneapolis urban Indian. And actually, I just live over the hill from where my Ojibwe grandma lived and where my dad grew up. And my Ojibwe was my grandmother's first language before she learned English. Of course, the Ojibwe were not the first people here in what we now call Minneapolis, though. That was the Dakota people. They were here first. What is now Minneapolis is home to some of the Dakota people's most sacred sites. What is now called Coldwater Spring is the spot, the place of the Dakota people's origin of life story. It was almost destroyed during the Highway 55 project. St. Anthony Falls, Spirit Island were destroyed, now the site of the Locken Dam. The Bedote, where the Mississippi and the Minnesota rivers meet, was the site of a concentration camp for hundreds of Dakota people after the Dakota-US War of 1862. After that, the Dakota people were exiled from their own land. And we've been seeing some returning now who are deliberately steering conversations about our relationship to this place. A great example is the renaming of the lake Vedemakaska. Place and relationship to place matters a lot to Indigenous people, and place matters to all people. I've had a very winding journey to get here. My earliest days as an activist were around justice, social, economic, environmental justice, especially around transportation investments and transportation infrastructure. As a Phillips resident and activist, I lived just a half a block off of Lake Street for 36 years. Lake Street, of course, County Road 3. I lived right near where Lake Street and 35W cross, and I saw firsthand how investment decisions negatively impacted me and my neighbors. I was very frustrated with the community's inability to impact transportation policy and spending decisions that had so much direct impact on our lives. So I decided to run for Minneapolis City Council, and I served on the Minneapolis City Council for 12 years. I was there for the Lake Street redesign. I tried to use the city authority along with my council colleagues to keep Lake Street from becoming an inner city highway, and rather try to create places for people. I learned a lot about transportation policy and investments then. I saw how they impacted communities. I saw how often the communities that had the least access to power had some of the worst and most negative impacts. The West Broadway project, for example, it is like an inner city highway, and how especially people of color, Native people, who had sort of the most at stake on a lot of these county roads. 2 years ago, I moved to the corner of Pleasant and Franklin Avenue. Franklin, of course, County Road 5. I work at NACD, which is also on Franklin Avenue. My preferred transportation mode for my 1.5 mile commute to work is biking, which is no easy or safe feat on Franklin Avenue. At NACD, Native American Community Development Institute, we're the keeper of a community vision for an American Indian cultural corridor on East Franklin Avenue. We're trying to build a sense of place for Native people and really for everyone. A destination that envisions the street as a place where people want to be, where Native people own businesses and other entrepreneurs own businesses. A destination, a welcoming destination. And I have spent so much time on Franklin. I've seen our failures of making it a street for the people. My hope is that this conversation is the start of changing that, and that we will start to see all of our streets, including county roads, as being designed to create places for all people to feel welcome. I am very grateful to be asked to be part of this conversation, and I look forward to hearing from the other speakers as well. So that's what I have to say. Thanks for listening to me, Chimigwech. And now I'll turn it back to Cindy, I believe.
All right, thank you so much, Robert. Thank you for your words in starting and kicking us off as a speaker. Really appreciate you. So right now, just want to welcome all the folks who have joined us again, the new folks who are joining us right now. Just want to make sure that you all know that for the attendee side, you have the options of chatting to the panelists and the attendee throughout the webinar, as well as use the Q&A box. So if you have any questions, do use those features that are available to you. All right, so moving on to our next speaker is Ash, and I'm gonna have Ash just introduce himself, and he did it earlier. And then Ash, can you turn on your camera now?
Thank you, Cindy, and thank you, Robert. That was a really poignant description of the work that you've done and really gave us a sense of place as we begin this important work. So I'm going to share a little bit of context about our streets, why they're important, and this campaign. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen here. And I have a few slides that I just want to get through. So I want to start by talking a little bit about Our Streets Minneapolis. We are a local nonprofit that's based in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood of Minneapolis. And our mission is to make the city of Minneapolis better for folks who are biking, walking, and rolling. I'm just going to check the chat here to make sure that I am not missing anything. Okay. And yeah, so we started back in 2009 as the Minneapolis Bicycle Coalition. And a lot of the protected bike infrastructure that you see in the city of Minneapolis today is a result of the early organizing that was done by folks involved with the Bike Coalition. In 2017, we changed our name to Our Streets Minneapolis to also affirm our support for walking and rolling as well. Rolling meaning folks in wheelchairs or using things like electric scooters. And of course, our campaigns have had had a huge impact on what city infrastructure feels like. You can see here on the left, we've had our bikeways for everyone, and our latest campaign is called Making Winters Walkable, which we've been trying to get the city to do a better job of making sure that our winter sidewalks are clear and free of ice. We, of course, also run the Open Streets event, our signature summer event series, where we close major corridors to cars and open them up to folks biking, walking, dancing, and whatever else they would like to do there. They, in my mind, are a really powerful visualization of what our streets could be if we prioritize people on them. Today, Our Streets Minneapolis, I believe, has really emerged as a champion of anti-racist transportation advocacy, where we work to dismantle structural racism everywhere within our organization, in our advocacy, and within transportation decision-making in Minneapolis. So why are streets important? Why do streets matter? Streets have a huge impact on our lives. First of all, they take up a whole bunch of land in our city. Over a third of all of our land is streets. They truly are the canvas on which life happens in our city. Every single trip that we make begins or ends on a street. They dictate what our communities look and feel like. They provide access to opportunity. That's how we access jobs, food, school, and leisure. And because they have such a huge impact on our quality of life, who gets to design streets is really important. So let's take a look at historically how our streets have been designed. Historically, street design has not been a collaborative process. It has been white-led. Decisions have often been made for Black, Indigenous people of color and not by them. Often it's top-down, made by a few people, often without a clear understanding by the general public of how those decisions were made. And they've favored the movement of cars over all other modes. In Minneapolis, of course, but also all across the country. So this has had major consequences for our communities. And what are some of those consequences? I want to give you a few examples. The biggest of them has been where we have chosen to put our streets and our freeways and our roads. When the interstate system was built back in the 1960s, they were intentionally routed through Black communities. Here we see I-94 through the Rondo neighborhood, through Minneapolis in St. Paul, and it also went through North Minneapolis. It destroyed many Black homes and businesses, a major source of Black wealth. The effects of these highways are still being felt today, and the Minnesota Department of Transportation even had to come out and apologize and recognize the huge mistake they made when we created these highways. And so, as I mentioned before, our streets are designed to prioritize cars over all else. And so this has resulted in the epidemic of traffic crashes that we see today. Almost every one of us knows someone who has been killed or hurt or injured because of a traffic crash. This should not be normal. So again, because of where we've chosen to put our streets, we see huge racial disparities in who is affected by traffic crashes. There's about 100 fatal crashes on Minneapolis streets each year. Native American community members are 5 times more likely to be killed than white Americans, and Black Americans are 3 times more likely to be killed. Again, this really should be unacceptable to anybody who believes in justice. Another big consequence of the way we design our streets is its link to the climate crisis. Today, the single biggest reason carbon pollution is getting worse is because of driving. It is the fastest growing sector of carbon emissions. And a lot of it is because we've designed our transportation system and our streets to encourage as much driving as possible. Again, because of where these streets are located, communities of color breathe worse air. And those who contribute the least to climate change, especially folks who've been left out of transportation decision making, are the ones who are going to suffer and bear the brunt of its worst impacts. And layered on top of all of this is something that's really important to me, is the violent reality of policing on our streets. Policing has caused and continues to cause great harm to our community members of color, especially our Black community members, also immigrants, people who are trans, gender nonconforming. For many people, it really is their first encounter with the criminal justice system. Black men are disproportionately policed. You can see a Star Tribune article found that Black and East African drivers made up 78% of police searches in Minneapolis from June 2019 to May 2020. So it often has fatal consequences for many of our community members. Just yesterday, Dijon TZ was killed by Los Angeles police when he was stopped for riding his bike on the sidewalk. Safety on our streets extends far beyond traffic crashes. It should also mean that people of color, especially people who are Black, are able to move through public spaces without fear of police harassment and the consequences that come with it. If you have any questions about our stance, please read our blog post on enforcement, and I will share that at the end of this presentation in the chat box. So, what do we need to do to get to better streets? First, we need to change who has input into street design and make sure that we're including the voices of those who have historically been left out. Next, we need to change policies and the culture at places where decisions get made. This is mostly at public work departments across our state. And if we do those things, we can really achieve changes to make our streets better for everyone. We are making progress. The City of Minneapolis recently created a Vision Zero program that seeks to eliminate severe injuries and fatalities on our streets from traffic crashes. The city also has a goal of 3 out of every 5 trips to be made by using a means other than a car by 2030. So these are pretty good next steps. We think that these are important goals that we should be working towards. However, a small portion of our streets are responsible for the vast majority of bad crashes. The City of Minneapolis calls this the high injury crash network. Just 9% of our streets account for 70% of severe crashes. And you can see on the map on the right here, each of those blue dots is a crash that's it's a severe bicycle, pedestrian or vehicle crash that happened in our city between 2007 and 2016. And you can see that just a few of these streets are responsible for a majority of the crashes. And this is from the Vision Zero report that was put out by the city about a year ago. Of these high injury, there are 114 miles of high injury streets that I just mentioned. Of those, 48 miles are actually not under the control of the City of Minneapolis at all. They're owned and operated and maintained by Hennepin County. This is the county that the City of Minneapolis lies in. So Public Works at Hennepin County is responsible for mostly everything that happens on those streets. All of the streets highlighted in green on the map on the right are owned and operated by Hennepin County. So these include streets like West Lake Street, West Broadway Avenue, Franklin Avenue, and Lyndale Avenue. So if we are to tackle these problems that I mentioned earlier, building police-free streets, building streets free from crashes, streets that don't cause climate change, we absolutely need to tackle the streets that are owned and operated by Hennepin County, because nearly 1 in 2 of these bad streets are owned by that entity. That's why today we are launching this movement called County Streets for People. Our aim through this movement is to build an inclusive coalition of people who can put pressure on our decision makers to put the needs of the people who live and work and play along these streets first. So I just want to give you an example of what some of these streets look like. Here's an example from West Broadway Avenue, one of the streets that has one of the highest crash rates in the city. They're mostly what are called 4-lane undivided streets. They have 2 lanes, car lanes in each direction. They usually have very wide travel lanes, which encourage people to go faster. They have a lot of weaving amongst them that result in more sideswipe and even rear-end crashes. And they don't usually have a barrier or median between them. The other big thing is that Hennepin County streets lack crosswalks. I myself live off of Franklin Avenue and I feel the effects of this every single day. Hennepin County has a policy of not marking crosswalks unless it is at a traffic signal. And so drivers do not stop as a result. I just want to show you this quick video that I took last year of one of our supporters trying to cross South Lyndale Avenue. You can see that's a pretty amazing video. That is the reality for many people. And at the end of that video, you can see a cop car came by and didn't even stop. So, people often have to walk thousands of feet additionally to go to where they need to go. And it really shouldn't be the case. And like I said, these streets have frequent crashes. Again, this is South Lyndale Avenue. Every week or so, we hear about yet another crash that happens on Lyndale. This is a picture that's taken by another one of our supporters, Alex Burns, outside his home on Lyndale Avenue. And I want to mention another fatal crash that happened last week. Idris Ali Yusuf was killed on a crash on Franklin Avenue, very tragically. So if you're not driving, you're often relegated to the margins on Hennepin County streets. This is a picture that I just took last weekend of a person in a wheelchair, putting their life in danger by having to go onto oncoming traffic because the sidewalk was not wide enough for them to pass through comfortably. Again, this should be unacceptable to anyone who believes in justice on our streets. So ultimately, who is responsible for changing Hennepin County streets? There are 7, these are Hennepin County commissioners who are responsible. There are 7 total commissioners, of which 3 are responsible for jurisdictions and streets within Minneapolis. The commissioners who are responsible in Minneapolis are Commissioner Irene Fernando, Commissioner Angela Connolly, and Commissioner Marion Green. I've had conversations with each of these commissioners, and all of them have have told me that this is, they see that this is a problem. They understand that something needs to be done about it. We need to help build a movement to show that there is a group of people in Minneapolis who really are hoping that they will take action to fix these streets. A couple of things about the Hennepin County budget I'll go through really quickly. It is a really large budget. We have, it's a $2.4 billion budget, second only in size to the state of Minnesota. And Hennepin County Public Works spent $164 million on streets, roads, and bridges in the last couple of years. The problem with the Hennepin County budget is that it's really opaque. Decisions on street projects, how they're selected, how streets are chosen to be reconstructed, it's not really clear. And I myself am not really clear how folks in Minneapolis can have a lot of say into what the Hennepin County budget looks like. So, but we don't, one thing we often hear is that the county just doesn't have the resources to fix these streets. We just don't think that is necessarily true. We don't really need massive reconstruction projects or hundreds of millions of dollars to start. There's a lot of low-hanging fruit that can be tackled today at a low cost and pretty quickly. Here are some examples. This is what Lyndale Avenue South looks like. Again, this is pretty close to where the supporter was trying to cross, as well as where that crash happened. And I just want to show you, if we made a few low-cost changes, what they might look like. Here you can see an image provided to us by our partners at Lyft. You can see a few things that we can do. We can narrow car lanes by using just paint. We can reduce speed limits on county streets. We can mark crosswalks. We can improve lighting. All of these things can be done today without a whole bunch of investment. However, the infrastructure changes that I showed you are secondary to our bigger goal, which is really shifting power. Bike lanes, better sidewalks, and other transportation options are only meaningful if everybody can easily and comfortably use them. So we need to make sure that decisions about our streets are being made to prioritize those who have historically been left out. Black people, Indigenous people, people of color need to be prioritized in that process. And we need a completely different community engagement process as well. One that first listens to community needs and only then creates street designs. And at Our Streets Minneapolis, this is just the first step in building that movement. And we really hope you will join us. So I just want to also give a shout out to Commissioner Angela Conley, who recently took the lead on declaring racism a public health crisis at Hennepin County. Because so much of our structural racism manifests on our streets, we think this is a really good first step, and any conversation that talks about dismantling structural racism should include our streets as well. So I will stop there and turn it back to Cindy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ash. All right, so I just want to remind folks, if you have a question, that was very insightful, Ash. If you have a question, please store it in the Q&A box. We definitely want to hear from you. Unfortunately, we were not able to do a Zoom meeting due to the many people who wanted to be a part of this. We didn't want it to crash on everyone's end if we had like over 100 people little tiny screen on there. So this is a way that we can engage with folks. So if you have questions for our panelists and our speakers today, please store it in the Q&A as a reminder. So introducing our next speaker, we have Anthony Taylor. He will be introducing himself. I'll ask Anthony to turn on his camera now.
So hi, good evening, everybody, and nice to see lots of faces that I know. My name is Anthony Taylor, and I think a lot of people through history kind of, I think early days associated me with the Major Taylor Bike Club of Minnesota and the National Association, National Brotherhood of Cyclists. And I call myself an accidental advocate because I actually started out with biking as a response to just really a bad location. I moved to Minnesota to go to the University of Minnesota and play football. And what I found out in college is that everybody's fast and everybody's big, so football ended quickly for me. And I started biking to the gym, and the only gym was downtown Minneapolis. And it was such a hassle around parking and things. So I just started biking to the gym. And one day I just stopped going to the gym and continued biking. And it really was, a rekindling of childhood memories and that feeling of freedom. And really biking became not just my transportation, but really the way that I built my network of friends. And I found a very good mentor here in the Twin Cities who also biked, who was a South Minneapolis, long-term South Minneapolis native. And we started biking, and I think immediately the instinct to build community came with that, as I think is very, very common for Black people. And I think initially the goal was very simple. We just wanted more Black people biking. It wasn't more complicated than that. We wanted more Black folks on bikes, and we connected with a group of women that was going to do the AIDS ride from Minneapolis to Chicago, and we started the Major Taylor Bike Club. And really the focus of that club was a sport club. We were focused on riding longer and faster, and even our intention to get people on bikes was not successful to me. And one of the things I immediately realized was how much cycling was tied to the sport, how much judgment was associated with it, how much there was a sense of being fast and fearless was the way that you had to do it, and it wasn't safe. And slowly began to get engaged with a group of people. I think some people that were formative for me actually were people like Joan Pashik, Jason Tansman, many people that were involved with transportation-oriented cyclists, Dorian Greeley. And in those communities, I really began to learn about the ways that cycling is deeply entrenched in the community and how it impacts it. And that led me to learning about streets and their impact on communities. And in the desire to get more people on bikes more often, we really cultivated what we think is a movement called Slow Roll. And the goal of Slow Roll is not to get more Black folks on bikes, but to reconnect people to their communities, to have people realize their own personal power. And the bike is a symbol of that. And so this idea of reconnecting people in communities became our goals. And ultimately, Slow Roll only became successful because now we're averaging 75, 100 plus people on a bike ride, a majority of them Black and women, was that we, instead of connecting with cyclists and collaborating around cycling, we collaborate with artists. And it really, again, was a super formative lesson for me. So I am now an accidental advocate of biking in those ways. I do count the early days of the Bike Coalition and working with Ethan as a place where I really began to understand the built environment and to understand the impact of it on people. And one of the people that was also formative for me, his name is Maurice Cox. He's now the city planner. He's the head city planner in Chicago, formerly of Detroit and New Orleans. But really, he shared with me just the idea of democratic design, that design matters, that one of the things that we can do to make a difference is to introduce people that have been historically oppressed and segregated and pushed on the outside and been the victims of economic violence over all these years to the concept of design and how design matters, because design resonates with their spirit. And so once again, we're connected to the artists. And so I've been a part of a national group, Transportation for America, for the last couple of years, looking at the Corridor Consortium. We have been looking at how to incorporate artistic and cultural practice into planning and design projects, leveraging these cultural practices to expand opportunities, to enhance local control, and especially for low to moderate income families, communities of color, women, gender non-conforming, and really especially in communities where cities have intentionally disinvested and underinvested in those communities. And we know that culture is an asset. And so one of the things with this work is that the the county roads are really important because now we're embarked in work around what are called cultural districts, Franklin Avenue, Broadway Avenue, 38th Street. What am I leaving out in Minneapolis? But anyway, you get the point. These are county roads, and I'm going to share my screen. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, I want you to, let's see, work with me here. Can you all see that picture? This is let me ask you, how long would it take for the city of Minneapolis to develop this mass transit system using electric cars to get around the cities? And you can post it in the question, but how long will it take us to develop this system for our twin cities? This is streetcars. So I'm just letting them come through. So I want to share with you that this actually is a map from 1947. This is the streetcar system that existed in Minneapolis in 1947, and it was ripped up. And when you look at the map, what you may see is that Franklin Avenue, Broadway Avenue, University Avenue, Lake Street, Lyndale, 38th, all had system. And the amazing thing is that at that year there were 282 million users of that system. In 2019, there were only about 82 million users of our current transit system. And so I think that, again, you know, these are all county roads, and I guess the importance of them relative to how we get around the city, how the city is designed, is really critical. Another crazy fact, and I am also not an accidental advocate, but I also have issues, and so it makes me study history. I don't know if people have known that our highway system also, you know, not our highway system, but our county road system, Lake Street, Lyndale, Broadway, Franklin, were also deeply impacted by decisions made in Hennepin County, and work that was done with NASA in the early 70s, where they were looking at emergency landing systems or emergency landing routes for the space shuttle. And one of the things that was done is that the Hennepin County actually began to work with them and committed to that, and they actually widened the streets. And so to Ash's point, not only were the streets not designed for people, they initially were designed for cars and surrendered to those systems. And after that, it was even more extraordinarily amazing that they were surrendered to something more. And really, these thoroughfares are also surrendered real estate. One of the things I will say about cultural districts and what has happened is that when these districts were surrendered, meaning that they no longer seem to have value for the dominant community in the cities, cultural communities moved in and revitalized them. And they use culture and their need for connection and community. And those are practices and rituals that sustain themselves over time. They use these corridors to build those businesses with entrepreneurship, with personal investment, even as the city disinvested in them. And so now we're at a crossroads where we have an opportunity to really empower people, to reimagine what these districts will look like. We are at an amazing moment in time where we definitely have an opportunity to make a difference and redesign and redevelop these districts and these roads so that they are designed to support humanity and support the human in us all, and create connections. And the ultimate goal is to build community. And in Slow Roll, we have a saying that black bodies in motion are the ultimate expression of freedom. So as we center Black voices, and as we make a priority for those communities that are there for Black and brown people and people that have been disinvested in and left to their own devices that are rising, that we will actually make it better for everyone. So thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Anthony, and all the work that you've done. I learned a lot from what you just said, and so appreciate the history and the background of our streets and how it connects to people and how it impacts people in so many ways beyond just street infrastructure. I just want to remind folks who are putting questions on the Q&A that we will be answering those questions during the panel discussion. So we'll make sure to get to those questions. So keep those questions coming. Even if we don't get to them today, we'll make sure to follow up for sure, either in our blog or social media regarding those questions. So I just want to introduce our next speaker. We have Tina and Javier Tavera. I'll let them introduce themselves and I'll have them turn on their camera right now.
Hi, thank you so much for inviting us to speak for County Streets for People. We are Powderhorn homeowners since 2004, and we believe our communities deserve to live and commute in a safe city. So I will start our presentation. Oops, sorry. And I believe is this. There you go. Down here. There we
Okay.
go. As artists. As artists, our work amplifies voices which are typically not heard. We are here to share our art projects on Lake Street and our most recent Green Crescent art project.
For decades, we have organized art and cultural activities to help build community. This is a public example with Art.org in Northfield, where over 50 people of different backgrounds helped to create a 100 printed banner.
On Lake Street, we have organized a lot of art and cultural events. Project examples include Dia de los Muertos, Day of the Dead, along numerous businesses.
Another example, we built 8 murals created with Grupo Soap del Corazón on the Sears building to help beautify the construction of area before it was transformed into the Midtown Global Market.
I also worked for about a decade to help establish the Plaza Centenario with the statue of the Mexican revolutionary hero Emiliano Zapata at 1200 Lake Street. Zapata ideologically represents equity.
Our current Green Crescent public art project is to improve the experience for residents, daily commuters, and one-time visitors near the new train center on Lake Street.
The Green Crescent Public Art will be located at the junction between I-35W, Lake Street, and the Midtown Greenway, where 4 neighborhoods intersect: West Phillips, Whittier, Lyndale, and Central. The Green Crescent site is representative of Minnesota's most diverse areas and in regards to race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status.
This site is currently under construction. Some of our public art goals include to contribute to the Wayfinder to help people, orientate people, create a design that encourages movement, add lighting for safety. The public art will be made out of metal and it has to be durable to last at least several decades in Minneapolis climate and urban environment.
Our public art will be installed between the wave wall and the retaining wall along the biking and pedestrian paths. This will be an important connector of public transportation to cyclists, bus riders, and pedestrians. We envision a design so people can move freely and comfortably, and the grand opening is scheduled to be in the spring or summer of 2022.
This is part of the design. The artwork references Minnesota history. The public art installation has two prominent images, a horse and a flock of birds of numerous species. We selected the symbol of a horse because the project is on native land. Although the horse is not indigenous to North America, the horse has become an integral part of the lives and culture of Native Americans. Most cultures see the horse as a symbol of mobility, stamina, strength, and power.
Silhouettes of numerous flying birds of different species represents diversity and migration. The birds are a metaphor to those who have migrated to this area. Birds are popular throughout the world within different cultures. Often birds symbolize freedom as creatures that can walk the earth, fly, and swim. In most cultures, the bird is a spiritual connection between the human and the spirit world.
The design is a lenticular design that will encourage movement as a different image appears depending which direction you're traveling. This video that you're seeing is just a model. When traveling from the from the Midtown Greenway to Lake Street, the horse will appear. And that's from south to north. When you're traveling from north to south, you will see the flock of birds appear. Of course, this is a maquette, and the finished work is going to be made out of metal, large scale, 16 feet.
So we are looking for input, as our intentions are to make a design welcoming to numerous identities, genders, races, religions, abilities, orientations, and more. So if you are interested in seeing more about the project and providing input, please complete the survey on our website. It is at www.greencrescentart.com.
And we're going to put that on the chat, so if people want to visit the site, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I have to unmute myself first. Thank you, Tina and Javier. That was really wonderful. I'm really excited to see the art from that. I know that you've done a lot of, you both done a lot of engagement in asking the community on their input, especially when that's an intersection of many neighborhoods in that area. So thank you for sharing your project with us, and hopefully folks can share their opinion about it too as well. I just put in the chat where you'll see that survey at Green Crescent, let's see, greencrescentart.com. All right, so we're moving along, and we just want to make sure that we get to the time for the Q&A panel session. So our next speaker coming up will be Will, and I will, Will Lumpkins, and I'll have Will introduce himself. Will, can you turn on your camera right now?
Hi. All right, everybody hear me? My name is Will Lumpkins. I'm a North Minneapolis resident, lifelong resident. I'm real strong about my neighborhood, the advocate for a lot of different things, but biking mostly. And to tell you a little bit of history, I got into biking because I'm also a lifelong diabetic. I found out I was diabetic when I was 20, so I figured I'd get into biking or something like that to kind of combat some of the health issues that I was having. After I started biking, I kind of got to know my local bike shop down on Glenwood in North Minneapolis, which is also a Hennepin controlled street, I believe. And, you know, I started noticing a lot of infrastructure all of a sudden once I started biking, like protected bikeways, greenways, things like that. And I really noticed how like the South Side had more investments than the North Minneapolis. So I kind of got into really advocating for North Minneapolis and better infrastructure in my neighborhood. And part of the way that I got to doing that was joining the Minneapolis Bicycle Advisory Committee, which was kind of integral to teach me the processes of how, you know, we change things on our streets and how the community has input on the engagement and things like that, of that nature. I also got involved around that same time in the Northside Greenway project, which was a project designed to build a greenway right down the central corridor of North Minneapolis, which would be like 3.3 miles long, and kind of connecting the south side of Minneapolis to the northern suburbs and us to downtown, and linking up a lot of other infrastructures in North Minneapolis also. That was great. Our first project was something called Open Streets, which I'm sure everybody at our streets is familiar with. It was one that was centered around the North Side Greenway, and it was interesting that we did engagement through an Open Streets project, because it really allowed people to come to the street and really see how we could change the street, and give the residents ideas on what we wanted it to look like, and not necessarily what would just be kind of shoveled down our throats. It's like how they usually do it. So as I got more involved with that, I noticed that the city was trying different ways of engaging. And I thought it was really interesting that, you know, they got out on the streets and they made sure that they got us involved with door knocking, and they made sure that they used residents that lived in the neighborhoods to do that type of door knocking, because it's really important that your neighbors see neighbors, you know, when they're talking about projects like this in the neighborhood, and not just people from the outside. So that was really important, and we made sure that we made double passes on things like door knocking, but we also had open houses, different events through the community, different collaborations, and just really try to hit everybody and make sure that everybody's voice was heard. And we did that over the course of 2 or 3 years, and we made sure that we doubled back and did a lot of passes, repasses, to make sure that everybody's voice was being heard. And what we found out was that when we did those repasses while door knocking, a lot of the residents had changed over already just within that 1 or 2 years. So what we noticed is, like, when you're living in a transitional neighborhood like North Minneapolis, that it's important to get that engagement done, and in a timely manner too, because the climate can change so quickly. So you always want to make sure that you're doing a lengthy amount of engagement, but also not too lengthy, because you can kind of start over in your process a little bit too. So that was something that we kind of learned, and I hope that a lot of projects going forward in North Minneapolis can learn from too, making sure that those neighbors are accounted for, and everybody's voice is heard. Because even though we did a lot of engagement around the Greenway, you'll always get people that pop up and say, hey, you know, I was never engaged. So making sure that those people even get a chance to get their voices heard is very important. Talking a little bit about what I'd like to see on West Broadway, which is, I think, our most busiest county street in North Minneapolis, is to slow it down some. You know, it seems like all of our county streets are just expressways going from downtown to whatever suburb they connect with. And it's just a thoroughfare for the suburbanites to pass through our neighborhoods, which maybe in the past, when we had more commercial businesses for them to stop at, it might have been kind of cool. But now it seems like, as we have less things for them to stop, that they just fly through. And you know, people are getting hit out here, and it's important that we design our streets that if people aren't going to slow down, that it's going to kind of make them slow down. So having traffic calming measures, I think, is extremely important in the future of West Broadway. You know, I like to use Laurie as a good example, but even Laurie could be improved on in North Minneapolis. But they got it right with bike lanes. I think that they just need to maybe they could have listened to the neighborhood a little bit more, because people still have some complaints about Laurie. But I think Ash early early on talked about the 4-lane highway concept that they basically kind of have in a lot of these neighborhoods, and yeah, the 4-lane undivided. And I see that being the #1 cause of a lot of the problems, is that, you know, you get somebody that's slowing down, doing the Minnesota nice gesture of letting someone pass in front of them, but the car behind them just skirts around them in that extra lane, and an accident ensues. And I can attest to some of that safety that needs to be improved, because I was actually hit on my bike on West Broadway in 2018, and it was a horrifying experience. And it was exactly what I mentioned, is somebody was trying to kind of make a light and just going too fast. And if Penn Avenue and West Broadway, which are both county streets, would have been designed correctly, it would have been designed to slow down traffic, especially in those high frequency corridors like that. So going forward, I would love to advocate in my neighborhood for people to slow down, especially as we start to get more into the realm of electronic scooters and electronic vehicles. All the infrastructure that we're advocating for over the last 3 or 4 years or longer in North Minneapolis, that was for bicycles originally. Now I'm seeing more electronic vehicles using those, and even people in wheelchairs and things like that. So I even stopped calling them bike lanes and started calling them alternative transportation lanes. and it just kind of fits for the future, because I think the future is just more micro transportation like that. You know, we encourage people to get out and walk and get out and bike and just get out and get some fresh air. So hopefully people can do that safely in North Minneapolis in the future. I think that's all I have.
All right, thank you so much, Will. Thank you for all the work that you've done with the Northside Greenway, and your years of engagement on that, and your continued work in the community. So I'm just going to move this along so that we can get some time for some engagement questions. So our last speaker for tonight, a really amazing person, and I'm going to have them introduce themselves. We'll have Felicia Perry come up as our last speaker of tonight before we go into our panel discussion. Felicia, can you turn on your camera right now?
Peace. Hey, everybody. I hope you can hear me. My name is Felicia Perry. I'm a longtime resident of Minneapolis. I've been in Minneapolis for over 35 years of my life, and I've spent the majority of those years here in North Minneapolis. I'm sitting at home in my North Minneapolis home, which is 2 blocks from County Road 81, otherwise known as West Broadway. And so I live, work, and fellowship like right here on this corridor. Also the executive director of the West Broadway Business and Area Coalition. And so I live literally, y'all, like 5 blocks away from my job. And so a lot of the times now in the summer, since I started working at WBC, I would either walk or ride my bike because it just didn't make sense to, honestly, it would actually take longer to like hop in my car, find some place to park and cross West Broadway in order to just go into the building. So I would ride my bike. So over these 35 years, I've walked these streets, I've biked on these streets, I've driven on these streets, and it's really interesting that now a lot of my work brings me to WBC, and our mission really is to create a vibrant and thriving North Minneapolis with a specific focus on what's happening on the West Broadway corridor. And so what happens on these streets is really my business, and it's really all of our business as I'm really learning more about the history of what's happened. And a lot of what's happened on West Broadway, that history was shared by, you know, my neighbors like Will, or folks that I collaborate with like Anthony Taylor. So I won't go too much into that. What I will say though is we are at a really interesting time where like recognizing that streets have been historically used against communities like mine, in communities like mine. Highway 94 dividing people, Olson Memorial Highway, another county road, the way that divided Black people from the Jewish people, from the affluent white people who, you know, back in the 40s and 50s, when we talk about this really vibrant time for West Broadway, it was really white, and that was very intentional. And then after the riots in the 60s, and we started to see more Black families moving into North Minneapolis, which on older maps was labeled as the Negro slums, as some of us know. So just thinking about how when Black folks started to live, work, start building business here in the community, there was a very intentional divestment in the streets, in the businesses, in the community as a whole. And right now, while all eyes are on West Broadway, all eyes are on Lake Street, eyes should also be on Franklin Avenue. We have a lot of our Indigenous family that live, work, and fellowship in the streets there. And so really thinking about this moment and this movement that we're all in the midst of like really creating, and wanting to invite each of you paying attention and watching tonight into that, to be a part of, you know, not just business as usual where the county kind of has an idea about what they want to do and develop and do to our streets, and then they kind of set up a whole plan, and then they might check off a box around community engagement, which they might later admit that they didn't do very well, but there's really no intention around what happens next time. And like right now is next time. There's a lot of things happening. And what we really want to invite people to do is be a part of things happening for us, by us, rather than things happening to us as they historically have. And so I think I mostly want to kind of raise that, you know, for sure for West Broadway, but across the city, because what I'm realizing so much in a lot of coalition work I'm doing in this moment is how interconnected the liberation of all of us is connected. So I wanted to raise that up. I also want to uplift the sort of collaborative partnerships that I've had the joy of having over the years at West Broadway. I get to work on Open Streets West Broadway, in which we take up the whole corridor. We get to collaborate with our streets. And it's one of those things that really draws people to the corridor. We have Black Friday on Broadway coming up this November, and we've been having that for the last few years. That brings people to the corridor, and we want people to be able to visit safely. We don't want people to be worried about, you know, a vehicle hitting them at one of our bus shelters. We want them to feel like the streets are lit properly. I want our elders to be able to walk on the streets all year long, you know, if they have that ability. And those of us who don't have the ability to walk, to still have access to all of our businesses, all of our small businesses, and resources that exist on the West Broadway corridor. It affects our access to those day-to-day things. And so in remembering the humanity around all of this, these streets aren't just for somebody to pass through. They're also there for our communities to access and use to do what it is we need and what it is we want, regardless of where someone else's job is across the city. So kind of in closing, I do want to also mention that, you know, I said there's a lot of different things happening. People have asked me about, you know, what's happening with like the Blue Line, is that coming down West Broadway? These are all really amazing questions. Some of the work that I do at West Broadway is I work with the Northside Economic Opportunity Network, also known as NEON. We're putting on Northside Business Luncheons every single week. We used to put them on the corridor, but now they're held virtual, but it's a really great spot to really learn about what's happening on West Broadway, what other type of collaborations we have, specifically like with Juxtaposition Arts, and the amazing work of their tactical team, which is our youth, our community youth, who have been a huge part of like shaping and helping define like what's happening on our streets as well. So without going too much into all of that, because there will be more opportunity for you all to engage and for us to offer you or welcome you all right onto our streets, I just want you all to make sure that you are following all of the core partners and all of our work in order to support it collectively. And I hope I covered everything, Ash and Cindy.
All right, that was great. Thank you so much, Felicia. All right. So we are on to the near end of our webinar. I so appreciate your words and also your experience along the corridor and expressing what you've gone through along West Broadway and what you've been doing specifically for that corridor and the businesses that has been impacted. So thank you so much. So we're moving on to our exciting panel discussion. Thank you for folks who are putting questions in the Q&A. You still have option to do that. Folks who are on the call, if you have a question for any of our speakers, anything that they've discussed or anything that you want to hear from them. So we're just going to start that up. Again, our ASL interpreter will be on one screen, and then the person who will be answering the question will be on the other screen. This is the only way that we can have the interpreter on in a larger screen so they can actually be seen on the attendee side. So that's how we're going to continue this in the panel discussion. So in no particular order, I'm just going to ask a question and then pass it to speaker or anyone who wants to answer that question. So even though this one is specifically towards Anthony, so has there been any effort to get cultural influencers, whomever that may be, for the various groups to get biking and being an advocate to make it, for the lack of a better term, cool for those who don't currently think it is? So I'm going to pass this question to Anthony. If Anthony's comfortable answering that question, you can turn on your camera, Anthony.
Hello. You know, I think the answer is, let me say that on a personal level, the answer is yes. That like I said, what I really realize, and I would go so far as to say, and also say that I think that we talk about it being cool, and that's a way of thinking about it. But what I really have learned is that it has to be a way of making it inviting, a way to make it judgment-free, a way to make it actually emotional. And I think that is now what I really realize in terms of the experiences that we create on bikes. The slow roll is that it is about helping people have a positive emotional experience with the bike. And in some ways, we're interrupting years of being taught that bikes are for poor people or people who can't drive or people who have DWIs or whatever. We've been taught that bikes are for kids. We've been, you know, I mean, there are all these things. And not only that, many people have had horrible experiences on bikes. I mean, one of the things I will say is that we have to acknowledge the lived experience of people. People who bike think everybody bikes. And if we are real about this, and I think that our friends at our streets can validate this, are we still at 6 or 7% of trips by bike? I mean, we're still at the beginning of a movement. And not only that, I think it offers us an opportunity to share a positive message that we are at the beginning of a movement, that we actually, that we haven't left people behind, that we have an opportunity to get engaged. So I think, you know, we're doing it. And I do believe that if we engage artists, musicians, right now, Slow Roll starts with a DJ. We serve food. Nobody gets left behind. We fix flats. I mean, we literally move as a body. And if you have never been on a bike ride with 75 of your best friends playing music, it is actively a parade and it changes the whole community. So, you know, Slow Roll and working with people that are getting started has really taught me how far away, how judgment filled, and how male. I mean, that's another thing, it is really something to realize how sometimes male dominant energy really throws off a space in terms of inclusion. And again, these are things that I've kind of picked up on and learned. And so now in Slow Roll, for example, our ride leaders are 90% women, and really 90% women and non-conforming, because it really has changed the way that we work. So I think there are examples that I think that Nice Ride did some of that for a while. I think that, Nice Ride neighborhood is no longer around. I know Will was part of that. Felicia was part of that. I think Christelle is on the call on somewhere in it. She was part of that. And that was a program that we created with Nice Ride. And I think that really artists and art and culture is the answer. So, I hope that is happening. And, shout out to, Southside crews that are doing the same thing, where we're adding culture and art into biking. That's really the answer for what we're doing.
All right, thank you so much, Anthony. I can contest to that. Been to a couple of slow roll rides, and it's just been quite amazing, the sense of community that you just feel when you're just like started, and that's like your first slow roll ride. You just feel so included in that ride, and you also learn so much from the people who are on that ride as well. So I really enjoy them. So on to our next question from an attendee. What are some ways during COVID-19 where I can be physically involved in a project for safer, smarter streets? So I'm going to pass that on to Ash, who would like to answer that question. Ash, you can turn on your camera right now.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you for the question. So yes, COVID-19 presents a unique challenge for us in our organizing and in our community building. This meeting, originally, we had hoped to have in person with all of us being able to come together, see each other physically, and of course that's not an option going forward. However, I still think that there are many things that we can do to kind of get people to understand, one, what the problem is, two, get them to care about it, and three, start organizing to make change. The first thing I would recommend is folks check out our Streets for People work group. This is a volunteer work group that is part of our Streets Minneapolis. Folks there are brainstorming ways in which we can move this forward. One thing that we have been thinking of is flyering and door hanging about along the routes that we would like to see change happen. And two, I think there's other things that we can do, both online, on the phone, and on email to get the word out. So I will just stop there and see. I know that Bill and Felicia and Anthony, you've all had some really you've all done this a lot. So I just want to see if you had anything to add to that particular question as well.
Well, I mean, I've done a lot of community engagement. I just have not done it in a pandemic. So it's been a learning process when, a lot of my work, at least, has always involving people physically somehow, right? Being in their presence. And so it's one of the things our core partners group has actually been talking about. What does it look like to do this community engagement we've been planning since the beginning of this year with everyone still? And as you see, even with this webinar, we're still working out like what that looks like. How can we really interact? For safe in-person stuff, it's something that's on my mind as we're even working on Black Friday on West Broadway, and what that looks like, inviting people for a retail experience for another year that's just going to look and feel a little bit different. I think what we're examining is if it's inside or outside, noticing that people feel safer. And but also when you're outside, being able to manage what all space you're kind of taking up. And then how do you manage folks having the PPE, if they are touching things, having, you know, hand sanitizer, keeping those things in mind if people have to sit, or, reevaluating if you're going to have refreshments and or how that's being served. With Black Friday on Broadway, it's happening in this transition between fall and winter. And so adjusting for what the weather might look like. What I find is, it's really this idea of what the crowd management looks like. And if it's something where you're expecting people to be there together in a space for a long time, and how you might have to make adjustments. We might just have to have smaller crowds and not always work towards, the bigger bang, like having so many people packed into a space. And spreading it out and really seeing what it looks like to maybe have these smaller crowds of individuals that you're interacting with safely, and seeing how much more in depth that relationship building might be. And so I think what's really important is that we give everything some grace and some time. One thing that communities like mine never get is like time. Like we can like face oppression for like hundreds of years, right, Robert Lilligren? Like centuries, right, of like systematic like oppression and stuff. And then when someone's finally ready to acknowledge they've like didn't mean to us, we gotta hurry up and like to solve it. But give your communities time. You have to move at the pace of community, and we don't all move the same. And so give that to even the process of figuring out how do we safely gather in a time of a pandemic. So, because all those answers aren't there, I'm always going to be the person to say that I don't know, but let's figure it out. But that's part of what we figure out. Find out what people are comfortable with. Think about how people engage with a space and how you can mitigate certain things. Are children there? How does that get managed? So think about that. Usually we try to make it a community event. Does it need to be that this time? How does it become accessible still for families if you're going to change that? So just ask all of those questions and kind of work it out from there. I hope that was helpful.
All right, thank you so much, Felicia. Unfortunately, we are near the end, and I'm just going to pass this on to Ash to close us off so he can let folks know how to get involved, and then we'll end our webinar. So Ash, if you want to turn on your video right now.
Thank you, Cindy. So I am just going to close us out here. Thank you all so much for being part of this. And I just want to share some next steps for what we can do together. So this, like Felicia was saying, we want this campaign to move at the speed of community. And we want this to be a collaborative, community-focused campaign where the answers come from within the folks that we engage, and especially the people who live alongside Hennepin County corridors, and especially folks who've historically been left out of transportation decision-making in the past. So a few immediate next steps that you can do today. One is you can sign up for our newsletter at ourstreetmpls.org. You can follow us on Twitter at ourstreetmpls. Our Instagram and Facebook have the same handle as well. So what we're hoping to do over the next year is do some really deep organizing along these corridors that we mentioned. So Lake Street, Lyndale Avenue, West Broadway Avenue, and Franklin Avenue. These are corridors that we've picked because of the partners who we've chosen to partner with all have strong presences there. We are hoping to engage in a variety of ways. We're still figuring out what exactly that might look like, but we need your voices to help shape that. And we need your voices to help figure out, what our next steps will be. So over the next few months, we will have a series of meetings that are focused on these corridors. And from those meetings, We'll build a vision for what a transformed street could look like. That's our goal, and we hope you will join us. And from all of these meetings, we hope to reach enough people that we can turn out folks, tell our decision makers that this is important, this cannot wait anymore, and we can start making change on these streets where we really start putting people first. Couple of follow-up things. We have some really great questions that have come up in the chat box. What we'll do is we will take them and we will commit to answering them within the next week or so. We'll also send out a survey as part of this kickoff meeting for us to get some feedback from you about what you thought you liked, what you didn't like, what you'd like to see more of. And if you do have any more questions, please feel free to email the organization. You can find our emails on our website. And so thank you all again for being here. I just again want to give a shout out to Kenya, who's done an amazing job of translating all of the things we've done into ASL. I know it's not easy, Kenya, and we really appreciate you. Thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to all the panelists, and thank you all for taking time out of the rainy days of summer to come to this kickoff. So hopefully we'll be part of this campaign going forward. Thank you.